Hi, everyone. My name is Emily Ramshaw, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of the 19th. On behalf of the Texas Tribune, I am so delighted to welcome you to the 2022 Texas Tribune Festival and to this, what is sure to be an incredible conversation with Jen Psaki. Jen is the former White House press secretary under President Joe Biden. Previously, she served as the White House communications director in President Obama's administration and as spokesperson for the U.S. Department of State. She just joined MSNBC as a commentator and host. Welcome, Jen. Thanks so much for joining us.
I'm so happy to be here. I am in my office, Emily, of 7 days. So as you can see, there's absolutely nothing on the walls, not even evidence I have a family or anything. But in a week, I'll get a little farther in that journey.
Well, we are looking forward to that. And hopefully there will be further Zoom conversations where we can see all those in the backdrop.
Exactly.
So I want to take a trip down memory lane here in just a bit. But before I do, as you just said, you started your new job as a commentator at MSNBC just last week, and you are set to also be anchoring a forthcoming show, correct?
That's right. Coming early next year.
Well, fantastic. Well, I hope you could just sort of tell us a little bit about what we can expect to see from you and how frequently we can expect to see you, sort of how you're thinking about your role at MSNBC.
Sure. So over the next couple of months, I think people can expect to see me doing political analysis on a range of platforms and a range of shows, and also speaking to what's happening in Washington. And I hope what I can do is peel the curtain back a little bit, speak in understandable and accessible English. That's always the goal, and really highlight for people what's actually happening here. What are the big decisions that are being made? What's happening in races across the country? So I'll be doing that over the next couple of months until the show launches early next year.
Amazing. And can you give us any insights on the show or what we should expect from the show?
Well, I do have a little bit of time, Emily, as you know, to develop that. It's a lifetime in television is a couple of months. But how I've thought about is I have a couple of North Stars. I think there's only one North Star, but I've given myself a couple. One of them is, how I want people to feel when they watch the show. There's a lot of things to be pissed off about out there. Believe me, I'm pissed off probably a couple times a week and feel enraged by. But what I want people to feel is not rage. I don't want them to want to burn down their neighbor's house. I want them to feel informed and empowered. And that to me is why I watch programs or why I read the 19th or long form journalism or watch a range of television shows, because at the end, I want to feel like I knew something I didn't know before. And it's something I want to tell my neighbors, my sister, my friend from college. The second piece, and this comes from many, many years of communicating, some days better than others, I will be honest, is that I am very much a believer we don't need to underestimate the intelligence of the American people. And I think people want information. They want to know how things are going to impact them. And there's a way to do that where you're talking about complicated issues and making it accessible. And so, that's my second goal, what the show looks like and the format and what's called. I've got some time to figure that out and work with a lot of very smart people here to do that.
Amazing. Well, I'd like to sort of compare and contrast a little bit by sort of revisiting what the last couple of years were like for you. White House press secretary is an utterly grueling role. You were in the midst of a pandemic. You were trying to parent. We had the Dobbs decision. I don't think truly anyone understands what that pressure was like. And I'd like for you, you talked about sort of explaining things in plain English. Explain what that pressure was like, what that job is like on a day-to-day basis.
I think basically any mom, working mom or not, would relate to this. My last job was a little bit like I was on 24 hours a day, meaning, I woke up typically in the 5s. I like to say sometimes it was 5, sometimes it was 5:55, depends on the day. My kids ended up getting up with me because they would hear me walking around. My husband says I'm 5'3" and not a very big person, but I stomp like an elephant around the house. So I'm very loud in the morning. And so it ended up being that I spent a lot of time with my kids in the morning before I went to work. That's not what I would have predicted necessarily, but what it meant was that I didn't really have the luxury that I had had when I'd worked in the White House previously to spread out the newspapers. I still like the hard copy. I don't know if that's sacrilegious, but I do.
No, we all do.
We all do. And I read it on airplanes. But I didn't have that luxury. So I would just try to juggle. I would do Legos with my kids, or make art projects with my kids, make them breakfast while I was trying to kind of intake what was happening as well. And then I tried to leave. I obviously spent the whole day working at the White House and doing everything that entails. And I would try to leave at around 7 to get home before my kids went to bed. That didn't work out perfectly every night. I have changed diapers on the phone with presidents, more than one, by the way, not just President Biden, but also President Obama. I'm not sure if they know that. Now they do. Many days I just tried to do the best I could. I tried to give myself grace in the imperfection that was trying to do that balance. I did find, and actually Rahm Emanuel, of all people, gave me this advice, which was that if you can carve out time each week that is sacred to you in some way with your family, it is a huge mental boost. But also most people you work for will understand that. And I tried to leave work around 5 on Fridays, if I could, not always possible, to do pizza night with my kids and my sister and brother-in-law and my niece and nephew. And it just was something that, it was wild and crazy, 4 kids running around the house, insanity. But I looked forward to it, and I tried to protect it and preserve it the best I could.
That's beautiful. And I mean, I relate to it a lot. I've got a 6-year-old.
I bet.
But talk to me.
I know you do.
But my world is different than your world was. Talk to me about the day-to-day pressures of that job. What is it like to be behind the podium? What is it like to have this barrage of questions coming at you, needing to serve all the different people that you're trying to serve, certainly the president at the top of the list? What's a day in the life like? What does it really feel like to be in that job?
I think it felt, I've only been the press secretary following President Trump. So that's my only experience doing the job. But I will say that from the moment I started the job, it felt like it had this added pressure of, or responsibility, it's maybe both, of trying to make the briefing room a place that was not a forum for propaganda, but also kind of taking the temperature down. So that was kind of an additional pressure. But I would say day to day, what I felt the pressure to do was to both represent what the president was thinking, which meant I was probably pretty annoying to people inside the building leading up to a briefing, because the truth is the briefing was always the best part of the day. At that point, you've learned everything you're going to learn before you go out there. You've hopefully spoken with the president. I did. I've harassed the chief of staff about things I didn't know. I've called up Jake Sullivan, Brian Deese, Susan Rice, people I needed answers from. It's a test essentially. But the pressure, I think, was to represent his views and make sure he knew that if I didn't, he should tell me that. And also try to respect the questions and the interest of the press without allowing for it to become a room where people were projecting their own points of view. But yes, it was a pressure. I don't think I realized it. I actually spoke to Dana Perino about this over the last couple of months.
Since I left the White House. About her. Yeah, because all these women who've been in this role, I wondered if you talked to any of the other women who'd been in this role before you.
Yeah, I did. I spoke with Dee Dee Myers and also Dana Perino in advance of the job. And I've also seen them since I left the job. And there is just a unique, to say the obvious, pressure of being a woman in a very public role. Now, obviously, people who are running for office, that's a whole different level. But what prepared me well for this, well, on Dana Perino first, what she said is when she left the White House, she had kind of different ailments that didn't hit her until after. And when I was leaving the White House, it's sort of like the stress starts to leave your body. And all of a sudden, my shoulders were hurting and my elbow. And so I don't know if there's a connection, but I will say that, when I was at the State Department, which is a job that I did back in the Obama administration, I was an early-ish target of the Russian propaganda machine. And a lot of what they did was target things that were, me as a woman, what I wore, what my hair looked like when I was pregnant. I fractured some bones in my foot and was wearing a boot, and they made that a conspiracy. It was really, and also they made it projected, or they painted me as somebody who didn't know what I was talking about. That is something that they would do to a woman, I think far less likely to a man, or that's not how they typically go after men. That was an incredibly difficult experience for me. It actually took an older, grizzled male, former Moscow bureau chief to say to me, it's a badge of honor that they're going after you. But what that taught me is you have to kind of take bullies on, not physically punch them in the nose. I'm not really, but to take them on and call them out. And that made me better prepared to digest, accept, push back on times where I was, the depiction of me was difficult at times when I was the spokesperson from the right specifically.
No, absolutely. I want to dive into a number of aspects that you just touched on in that.
There's a lot to unpack there.
There's so much to unpack there. Let's start with your relationship with the president. You were talking about how you sort of work to amplify his priorities. What was your relationship like? Sort of what was the give and take like? And how did that allow you to influence in any way what he prioritized? Like, how big of a seat at that table did you have?
As a 5'3" person, a pretty big seat. I would say that one of the things I realized, I'm 43. And when I worked for President Obama, I was in my late 20s and early 30s. And, I knew a lot of the things I know now, and always felt I was irritated when people didn't think I did. But I'm so much more comfortable in my own skin now, right? And just my own sense of self. And that was hugely valuable because I came in and I didn't know President Biden very well. He didn't know me. And that's actually something I raised with his team when I was talking with them about this job. And so, because I've always felt that personal relationship is vitally important, but I do think because I have had kids, I've lived some life, I've experienced disappointment, all of the things that a lot of people experience in their careers and their life in their 30s. I was a bit more secure in myself, which made it easier for me to say to the president, I said to him early, first, when I spoke with him about the job, Dr. Biden was there as well. She is just fierce and awesome and direct in a way that I'd say a lot of women are that I know. And she said, please always be direct and honest with us and tell us when something is happening. And what that means when you're working for somebody is when a bad story is coming, when something they're going to say is not going to fly well publicly. And I took that to heart. I wasn't responsible for telling him about every bad story, but certainly many of them. And I said to him early on, I will know that that we have an authentic relationship when you get mad at me for the first time, right? Where you tell me you didn't like something I did or said. And it did take a minute, but I'm a believer that is when you have an authentic relationship. And I just approached the job with less fear than I would say. I was so intimidated by President Obama when I worked for him that it took me years, and I was his last communications director. It took me years to feel comfortable enough with myself to speak truth to him. I feel like I came into this job, even though I didn't have a history with him, feeling more comfortable about my capacity and ability to do that.
So you set me up. I'm going to ask you when the first time Biden got mad at you was.
Oh, man. So, early on, he is a stickler for speaking about things in English. And I agree that there's a huge problem in how, sometimes in Washington, everybody's speaking in another language and vernacular nobody in the world understands. And I remember early on, it was probably a couple months in, he was preparing for a speech. And we were sitting at a table as he was going through the speech. Over in the East Wing. And he said to me, well, what are the press asking about? He used to ask about this a lot because it was kind of his prism to the outside world in many ways. And I said, well, they're asking a lot about how people can get checks if they don't file taxes. And he said, oh, God, that's a good question. What are you saying? And I said, well, first I say for non-filers. And he goes, whoa, whoa, whoa. What the hell is a non-filer? And who knows what that means? He's right. He was right. And so it wasn't that he was so angry. His point was, Nobody understands that. And he was like, try it again, you know? So I think over time, that was kind of my first inkling I remember. But, you know, over time, there were many issues he had very strong views about because he was president. He is the president about how he communicated about. And I always gave him an option to tell me if something I said wasn't right. And, you know, he took advantage of that sometimes or seized the opportunity, I should say.
Yeah. Did you ever flip the tables? I mean, were there ever times where you were concerned about how available or not he was with the media?
You know, we talked a lot about the right way to engage with the press. I will say that he answered more questions when I was the press secretary than the past president I'd worked for. He just did it a couple times a week by taking questions from reporters at events. He did 2 formal press conferences while I was there. And I certainly understand as a human being and somebody who's worked, you know, in government and in communications, the desire and the push of the White House press corps to have more press conferences. That's their right to do. They would like to have a press conference every day if that was possible. But I do think it's a little bit of a silly argument that if he answers questions multiple times a week, 3 or 4 at a time, that he's not available, because that is being available to the White House press corps.
You describe really liking the press briefing, like it was your quiz, basically. You know, you'd done your homework day long and then you get up there. I have to tell you that is a moment that would scare me totally shitless. Like, I mean, were there ever days where the back of your knees were sweating, or where you were shaky, or where you were like, what am I about to get asked? And what if I screw it up? I mean, do you feel terror, or are you superhuman?
No, I'm not superhuman. I mean, first of all, early on, I was thinking, and this is like a classic case of imposter syndrome, like, oh my God, I'm going out to do the briefing. Like, does Robert Gibbs know I'm doing this? Because he was my first boss in the White House. Brian Deese and I actually did a briefing together, and we laughed about whether we should tell Gibbs and Larry Summers, who were our early bosses, we were going to do this. And there were days, because I've been doing this long enough, I know when it's going to be a bruiser of a day out there in the briefing room, right? And reporters are going to ask you the same question 9 times, 10 times, 15 times. That's their job, right? I would sometimes joke, I don't know if you're a Ted Lasso fan. It is a show that basically got me through the pandemic. But Rebecca, the owner of the team, who I love her character, there's one episode, I think in the first season, where she does this thing where she makes herself a tree, and she kind of just makes herself larger. I used to do that all the time before the briefing, because I just needed to kind of reset and take a breath, that I was going to go out there, and I would sometimes I would do that, and then I would joke to my team, it's going to be a bruiser, you know, and you know that. So there were days where I knew that sometimes the press corps and their line of questioning is ahead of where the policy process is. And you just aren't going to have a lot to say. Sometimes things are sensitive because there's negotiations. There are days where you know you're not going to have a lot to say. Those are not the best days. The best days are when, you know, you call, as I said, I kind of used to harass the policy people. You call them up, they explain something, and you say, oh my God, I know how to explain GDP. Let me out there. I'm ready to go explain it. Those were the best days, but every day is not like that. And you kind of knew that.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about a day that was a really hard day for a lot of women in this country. If I recall correctly, the Dobbs decision landed in among your final weeks on the job, right?
I was there the night that the story broke in Politico, and it was one of my last weeks in the White House. But I remember the story breaking late at night, and we had to figure out what, if anything, we were going to say that night, because it wasn't the confirmed ruling. It was a leaked story that, of course, turned out to be entirely accurate. And I think, you know, the reporting in that case was amazing, historic in many ways. But as a White House, you're really thinking about, you know, the responsibility of not weighing in on a decision that hasn't yet been made by the Supreme Court. And there's not a lot of precedent for it. So in that night, we were figuring that out. And then in the days that followed, what we considered was how to communicate to the public the range of options we had at our disposal without overpromising what could be done if this ruling were to be made. So we talked a lot about the response in Texas to SB 8. We talked about and tried to really refocus the attention not on who leaked it or how the leak happened, the whodunit of it all, but really what the impact would be of a decision if that decision were to be made. Now, the strange thing in my experience is I left the White House. My last day was about 10 days after this leak. And so I was not there when the final decision came through. But I remember speaking with the president and with people internally about how we could not only garner all the resources internally, which a lot of the policy experts were very focused on, but also convey what was possible, what we could do, his commitment to protecting a woman's right to choose, a woman's right to have access to an abortion, and also his own view that this was connected to many decisions in the past, including Griswold versus Connecticut, that was a ruling related to women's right to have access to contraception and privacy. And we talked a lot about that too, to send a message that this could be a slippery slope. So that was what we did at the time, but not being there when the decision was made, it was sort of, I didn't know this, but I left sort of right in the middle of the early stages of what turned out to be an enormous historic ruling, a bad one, but also a real moment, a pivotal moment for women in this country, and one that is going to play out, of course, this November.
Yep. I want to ask what it was like for you in many news cycles. You talked about this a little bit, to sort of become part of the story, the soccer bombs, the sort of, viral videos, the memes, that you were a pop culture icon for the left in many ways. And that you obviously have mentioned what your relationship was like with the right. What was it like to not just be a spokesperson, but to be sort of the human at the center of some of these storylines?
Well, I'm very honored by that description. I'm going to save it for when my daughter is a teenager and tell her. I think that I started this job, the press secretary job, in the middle of COVID, and early on in COVID, however you want to describe the timeline. And I didn't even leave the White House at work for the first couple of months. Things were just so intense. We were all wearing masks or 2 masks. And the briefing room is very small. So I really just tried every day. I had kind of had this very narrow focus of trying to go out there every day and both present new, accurate information, try to make things more clear to the public about what was happening with policy issues, reset things in terms of the temperature in the briefing room, and also push back against propaganda. I really wasn't thinking about anything more beyond that. And, I went to April or May of 2021, I threw the first pitch at the Nationals game, which is its own funny story. My husband said to me, "You'll be fine." I said, I don't know if I've ever thrown a baseball. I mean, probably at some point. So anyway, I was thinking of what I would do if I ended up with a Dr. Fauci pitch. I kind of mapped out all the communications options. But at this game, I had people loudly booing me, and I had people cheering me. I had this older man, older white man, if I'm being honest. I don't know why I whispered that, but following me around, saying Shane. My husband was like, I was like, just calm down. However, the people who worked at it was near where we were just getting a drink, and the people who worked there were like, hang in there. And I was like, that's where I want to be, with the people who are selling the beer versus the old rich guy. I'm in a better place. That was my first exposure, if that makes sense, in a public way. I just, nobody was going out socially. I wasn't really leaving the White House. But I really tried to just stay focused on what my job was every single day. Nothing much beyond that.
Yeah. Well, let's pivot to talk about your new job. I'd love to sort of talk a little bit about how you think about the responsibility of the media in this moment. We hear a lot in media about the sort of echo chamber effect, and, people consume the news that they feel like already is amplifying their existing point of view. How do you think about your responsibility in this space? And again, we think about this every day, that the chance that you might contribute to an echo chamber effect.
I think it's being really conscious of that problem is the first step. I've lived and worked in Washington on and off for 20 years. Washington itself is an echo chamber, right? It's also where the policy making is happening in the country. And I know from, obviously working in White Houses, but also being a contributor at CNN and now here, that Twitter, for example, is a huge driver of what people are talking about. It's the biggest audience is media, frankly, of Twitter, but only 20% of the country is on Twitter. It's very white. It's very coastal. I am white. I live on the coast, but you need to be conscious of that. The other thing I think living in Washington, and I know you've spent time here and well, obviously I've covered a lot of things here, is that people speak you fall into a vernacular. This is true of a lot of industries, right? Business, Hollywood, certainly in politics, where you think, I mean, it is quite possible there was a barbecue last weekend where people had a conversation like this. My boss is a member of the squad. Yours is a member of the Blue Dogs, but we're all grateful for the gentle lady from Arizona for the work she did in getting the climate bill passed. It's like, I know what that means. Most people don't know what that means. And it's really being conscious of talking about hard issues in a way that's accessible. And I think, honestly, it's about checking yourself regularly, right? On whether you're doing that effectively or not, and not being immune to new information. That is something that often happens, right? You're working for a political party, you're working for a candidate, you're working in a White House, and sometimes you're working in media organizations, and you're saying to yourself, and we were talking about the Dobbs decision, that's an example. I remember back in June, I think it was June, yes, when the decision came out, a lot of Republicans I talked to were saying things like, well, yeah, there's going to be energy on the left, but there's going to be energy on the right. And in the moment, I was like, that's probably right. That's totally wrong, right? There is energy, sure, on the right, but the energy is on the left. It's in the middle. The vast majority of women in independents, Democrats, and men too in this country believe a woman has a right to choose. I believe a woman should have access to an abortion. And so, it's about also adjusting when circumstances change and listening to a range of voices. But I do think it requires being very conscious of that ease and falling into vernacular and also falling into the echo chambers.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, NBC took some heat from its employees initially about your appointment at MSNBC. You saw this obviously saying it was too soon, that it looked too cozy. Do you think that your appointment sent any particular message to the subset of Americans who believe the news is too biased? Or do you think this is, something that people didn't need to be concerned about?
Look, I believe that, I'm going to be transparent about what I believe. And I can't exactly, I've been in public roles for quite some time now in politics. I'm not going to hide from the fact that I believe in a woman's right to an abortion. I believe that people should be able to marry who they choose. I believe people should have access to health care. I don't see that as a partisan thing. I see that as just what I believe, and I will be transparent about that. I also think that the most compelling media that I listen to or engage in or care about, and I think this is true for a lot of my friends and family, are again people who teach you something you don't know and help you see a different perspective. And my goal is to do all the homework, and try to dig into issues so that I can explain them in accessible ways. It's not to randomly, gratuitously whack people from different parties, but I ultimately think you'll be judged by what you do. And that's how I'm going to approach this job.
I'd like to ask just a little bit about sort of mis and disinformation. Obviously, this was something you very paid close attention to in the White House. We see things like headlines like the White House asking Instagram to take down the fake Fauci account. I'm curious sort of what you think the appropriate role is for the federal government when it comes to this kind of speech or use of social media for dis and misinformation. And sort of does your calculus shift, on this at all, going from White House to media?
Well, look, I think people shouldn't misunderstand what they're doing. I mean, these platforms have publicly stated policies, right? Facebook, Instagram, and others about how they address misinformation. The problem is that they don't always implement them as they should. And nobody is telling them this is what your policy has to be. They're telling them implement your own policies. I will also say that, disinformation, I've spent a lot of time working in local politics and working for party committees and things like that. As you know, if there is a campaign ad running on a local television station that is false, the other opposing campaign will fight to get it taken off the air. And if it's false, it will get taken off the air. So why should social media platforms get to live by a different set of rules, especially when things are damaging? That's the fundamental here. One of the biggest rumors that was spreading when I was at the White House was that vaccines caused infertility in young people. Now, I'm a mother of a 7-year-old. If that were true, I would not get her vaccinated. It is not true. This information travels so rapidly that things like that are damaging to the health of the public. And that's where I think we may be overcomplicating the simple here. I very much believe in people's right to speak publicly, to speak freely. I believe in the role of the press. Believe me, part of my objective was to kind of resettle and kind of show the value of that's part of democracy working. But I also don't think that letting dangerous, harmful rumors fly on social media platforms is responsible. And I think both can be true.
Yeah. I want to ask just a little bit about your relationship with the press corps, what it was like sort of being in the trenches with all these folks, and whether that relationship shifts now that you are, going from that side to media. Can you talk a little bit about sort of the give and take or the behind the scenes? I mean, obviously there were folks who maybe played it a little safe, and there were folks you certainly tangled with.
Yeah. I would say that I don't think you could be the White House press secretary effectively, regardless of your party, if you didn't have a respect for the role of the press and the role of the media. That doesn't mean every day you liked what they asked or how they asked the same question 19 times approximately some days. Didn't mean
Sorry about that.
Yeah. No, it didn't mean that they always liked my answers or they always liked the answers of the press secretary. That sometimes is important for the public to understand that actually that back and forth, the pushing of the press corps and the reporters, their job is to hold government accountable. That is an important part of democracy. And standing up there at the briefing every day is the effort by the White House to respond to that and to be accessible to that, And this White House, and I've done another podium job, obviously the State Department, has 3 briefings a day, so many background briefings. Sometimes reporters privately complain about the number of briefings because there are so many to keep track of. That is democracy working. And I think that's important for people to understand, including in the back and forth. At the same time, I think that what happened in the prior administration was obviously they were a little fast and loose with the facts from the podium, but also it was a forum for speechifying from both sides and speechifying from the press room and speechifying from the podium. That's not the purpose. And I think resetting was making clear that, you can have whatever view you want. It's a free country on the right of a woman to have an abortion. You cannot spend 5 minutes projecting that view in the briefing room. That is not a good use of time. And so figuring out when the moments were to cut people off was part of it. And, most days I think I tried to do that fairly. Some days, I'm an Irish lass, so you got to temper at times, but I tried to maintain a cool and collected nature whenever I could.
That's amazing. Well, we're running short on time, though. The one last big question I want to ask you is just sort of, you talked a little bit about the downsides of being a woman in this role, right? And the risks and the way that you face attacks, whether it's over your appearance or your dialect or anything else.
Yeah.
Talk about the benefits. After a very long history of mostly men in the White House press secretary role, I believe the last 5 have been women. And what do you think it is about being a woman that set you up to do a great job in this role?
I think a big part of it for me was my perspective on being a mom. When I was pregnant with my daughter, I went back to the White House as the communications director. That's a whole other story for another conversation. But and I was kind of like many women who have children. I didn't know how it would impact. I thought it would make it harder. And actually, I found it made me better because I was living and experiencing a lot of the things that people were asking about. Schools being closed, not being able to find masks, not knowing, can I have a play date in my house or not have a play date in my house? That reflected my ability to participate and have a seat at the table in meetings more effectively. But I also think it made me better at the job. I think there are also some qualities of women that are different than men. That's a very generic statement. But, the press team that we built when I was there was the most diverse in history. Not for that sake, it's important to do because if you don't, as you know, it's kind of part of your mission, right? But it also made what we did better and how we prepared for briefings better, because we just had different perspectives, and it made our team stronger. And, that's also something I think, when I was in the press office early in the Obama administration, I was the only female spokesperson, right? Never mind like broad diversity and all of the meanings of that. And, I do think that as a woman in an industry that's male dominated, that was important to me. Not just other women, but women of color, men of color, more members of the LGBTQ community on the team. But I do think being a mom and having that perspective, and also like the crazy efficiency you have as a mom, made me better at the job.
Amazing. Well, Jen, thank you so much. We are out of time. It's been such a pleasure to get to share the Texas Tribune Festival with you, and we are all really excited to watch you in this new role. We'll see you on all of our screens very soon. Thanks again.
Great to be here. Thank you, Emily. Great to be here with you.